I am Mike Lyons, your host for another oral history interview for the Jacksonville Broadcasters Association. The association's purpose is to preserve the rich history and contributions of the area's radio, television, and broadcasting industries. The association is open to those past and present broadcasters and those affiliated with the region's broadcasting industry and entities who have served the region's proud broadcasting heritage. We welcome students who are focusing their careers on the broadcasting industry. Our guest today is Roger Weeder, the longtime news reporter at WTLV TV and a 35-year veteran of the television broadcasting business. Good to have you here with us, Roger.
Mike, always good to see you. It's been a while, but you know, we were in television together a long time.
A long time. And as we tape this, I think we're in the 10th month of the coronavirus
What a year.
pandemic. What a year. And we're taping this in December of 2020. Like I said, just amazing. What a year.
Yeah, I've never seen one like this. I think most people can say the same, Mike. It's been a roller coaster ride for all of us, and hopefully things will get better soon, but we'll just have to wait it out and see what happens.
That's right. Let's start out, first of all, you're a farm boy in Nebraska.
Yep.
Talk about that a little bit.
Well, I grew up on a family farm, 2 brothers, 2 sisters, a dad who started farming back during the Depression, shortly after the Depression. And we had 200-300 acres and worked the farm, and Mike, a great way of life. You worked with family, you worked hard, you played hard, partied hard, but it was just a great way of life, and I wouldn't trade it for anything in the world.
So you're a farm boy in Nebraska, and you decide to go into broadcasting. Why did you want to go into broadcasting? Well,
Mike, early on when I was in high school, I thought, man, wouldn't it be fun to be a sports broadcaster? Play-by-play, you know, that sports were ripe, and it was just so interesting, and I had a passion for sports at that time. So I went to a community or a state school, Wayne State College, near my hometown, and majored in communications, did play-by-play, college football, basketball, and it was really fun.
Radio, you were doing
and
radio.
that was radio back then. Television, I mean, there was some television, but back then, I'm talking mid-70s. I mean, the television programs weren't as developed then. So it was basically radio.
You enjoy the radio?
I enjoyed radio. Radio was, I think many people in broadcasting cut their teeth on radio. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
It was just it's a chance to develop your craft, and if you had a passion or an interest, you would possibly segue into television. But when I graduated from college, I started work at a small radio station in Fremont, Nebraska. KHUB were the call letters, and I worked there about 6 months. And you talk about an eye-opening experience. I mean, you come from an academic college setting to the real world. They start talking taxes and property taxes and valuations and all that. I mean, it's a learning curve. But I tell you what, it really opened my eyes up to the news side of broadcasting, and never looked back.
So what was it like there, your first 6 months in television? You just, I guess you learned a lot real quick.
Now, you're talking about television or radio?
Television, when you were at the station in Nebraska.
In Nebraska, yeah. I did radio in Nebraska for about 6 months. Then I was offered an opportunity through a professor I knew to move to Louisiana and go to graduate school. So I moved to Louisiana in probably 1982, and did graduate work at the University of Southwest Louisiana. When I left there, I began my first television job in Lafayette, Louisiana.
Lafayette. What station was that in?
That was KLFY, in the heart of Acadiana, Cajun country.
Mm-hmm. That was your first television job. What
Right.
was that like? I mean, how was that experience? First time in television.
Well, that was a learning curve too. I mean, although I did have a little more background in graduate school with television. But I tell you what, Mike, when you make the jump from school to real world, there's a difference, right?
Oh yeah.
I mean, it's things got to get done. You got to be on your game, and every day was a learning experience.
Yeah, everything's new every day almost.
Oh yeah, I mean, you had to learn the geography of the area, make contacts, and in the meantime try to acclimate yourself to the history of the area. So you had some history to go along with it. So it was a great experience. I was there 3 years and would not have traded it for the world, because I really learned a lot and met a lot of good people there. And I still go back to Louisiana occasionally, because it's where I started television.
So after that 3 years in Louisiana, you come to the bold new city of the South, to WTLV. How did that come about?
That was in July of '85. Dave Richardson was the news director then, and I knew at that point I had to leave Louisiana. I mean, I needed to grow in my profession, and then I came to Jacksonville for the interview, met with Dave, and I was offered a contract, so I came here, and seems like light years ago, but and in many respects, Mike, it's like yesterday. I mean, you kind of remember your first story. Bill Z was the chief photographer at the time. I think he's always been a chief, whether he held the title or not. He was always the chief.
Yeah. Yeah.
And Bill helped me get a lay of the land here in Jacksonville, the First Coast. I guess it wasn't known as the First Coast back then. It was just Jacksonville, and it was a great experience. I learned a lot, and been here ever since.
How was that different, coming to Jacksonville, working in Jacksonville, compared to where you were in Lafayette, Louisiana?
Well, Lafayette was more of a rural area, and it wasn't as big. Jacksonville was a bigger city back then, and obviously not as big as it is now. A lot has changed in 30 years, as you know. But I think the difference is just moved into a city with 5 bridges. I go, only later did I learn they were color-coded to get around. And so, I mean, there's a learning curve just with the geography of the city. I mean, you just don't go from A to B in 5 minutes all the time.
Your early years in Jacksonville had to be a lot of fun, but you're also developing and learning your craft and fine-tuning everything and getting more experience in it.
Oh, yeah. I mean, back then, we had some characters in news. I mean, it was a different environment back then. And I think in the newsroom at 12 at the time was Gary Nelson, Derek Hayward, Kevin Dooley, and John Watson was on the desk, and George Banks, who later became a city councilman, was on the desk as well.
Oh, yeah.
And
I worked with a lot of those guys you named at other
I
places
know,
where I
and
worked.
I'm trying to think. Randy Bruditz was there, as you remember, and what was the guy's name? The sports guy, Rock. Oh, I see his face. Then there was Harmon Wages was there for a while. And I mean, it was just a whole different environment back then. It was, and I guess one of the people I kind of looked up to was probably Derek and Gary. Gary was a very flamboyant, very aggressive journalist. You remember Gary's work, and I was, I mean, Gary was, I mean, he knew his business, and it was just a great time to be in Jacksonville and to be with people like that.
That really helped you develop your career and how to do things, and these people mentored you and helped you a lot.
Oh yeah, and you know, Ernie Mastroianni was there. He was an anchor. Then did he later become the news director? I'm trying to remember. I know he was the anchor because he had been at Channel 4 for so many years, and then he taught at a university in Chicago, I believe. Then he came back to Jacksonville, and Ernie was one of the anchors at First Coast News. It was TV12 at the time. And no, Ernie was, you weren't at the newsroom in that newsroom at the time, but Ernie's cliche word, there's no news in the newsroom. Man, get out the door. That's where the news is. It's not in here.
So what you see in the sky at the show follows a lot of preparation on the ground, as nothing is left for chance.
And that's one phrase that stuck with me for decades.
Right. You mentioned the one phrase. I have to ask you about this because, as I said, you were the king of the one-liner. I mean, you had sentence to sum up a story, sentence to tease a story, a sentence to close a story, and in a stand-up, a sentence to promote a story. You're just uncanny. And you had a sentence to make everybody laugh in the news meeting in the morning about stories. I mean, was that something that just always came to you, or you like to do that?
Well, I was a king of one-liners. I enjoyed one-liners, and I kind of look at news kind of like country music, Mike. You know, you have a theme, and sometimes you repeat that theme during the story. And
Ken Thomas said you call it the recipe book or something.
Oh, yeah, recipe. I mean, you would go to a certain event like a fire. You knew ABC, the main points that had to be covered. And then you would find some flavor of the event and weave that into the story as well. But not so much in the early days of news. Because, Mike, you remember I started, you maybe did one story a day. And as the technology changed, the expectation became greater, and it wasn't unheard of in the 2010, 2015 to do 3 stories a day. So I mean, you had to have a plan to win. I called it a plan to win. I told my photographers every day we go out, here's the plan to win.
That was another phrase, a plan to win. You had a phrase for everything, but you could do it. I mean, it was amazing how you could turn these things, and you could do it. A lot of time you would have them in your head or written, and they were ready by the time you got out of the car when you went back to the station.
well, what I did, Mike, is I found a formula that worked for me. And because most of the time you knew what you were going to confront, you know? I mean, what changes are the names, the location. So you pretty much know the foundation or the framework of the story. So pretty much you can work with that. And then what I would try to do is to find something unique out there that gave the story more flavor and a deeper meaning, and then kind of weave that around the foundation. But for the most part, I mean, I always found it easier to go out with a plan. Right. And then if it changed, it changed. It's no big deal. Right. But
you had to go with the flow.
Exactly. And sometimes, as you know, as many reporters know, you be on the story 10 minutes and you get a call and you got to bounce somewhere else. But you still had to do that story. Right. So you pretty much had to be organized and have a plan in place.
Bill Z said you had a surgical strike. A
surgical strike. That means you would pull up on a location and you sized up pretty quick if there was going to be much there or not. I mean, you know.
Right.
And so I'd say, Bill, let's hit this one hard and move on. It's surgical strike. I mean, just another phrase, and what I enjoy doing is always bringing some levity to the day, you know. I mean, you know, you'd be out in the truck all day, just driving around, going from story to story, assignment every call, say, check this out, check this out, check this out. And some days you'd circle the city twice, you know?
Yeah.
Before you got back to the station.
Too. You came from Lafayette, rural, I guess.
Right,
you had
more
to go
rural,
around,
yeah.
There's a lot of land to cover in Jacksonville too.
Right, a lot of stoplights. As you know, a lot of payphones back then.
Yeah, that was different.
Because we were dependent on beepers. Remember jumping out of the truck and.
I don't even know how we did it back then to compare the, you know, it's just.
But we made it work. We made it work. But I mean, you get beeped but back then there were payphones everywhere. I mean, it was not an issue. Right. You always had to make sure you had a quarter.
Right. You mentioned Bill Z.
Right.
And I know you worked with Bill Z a long time. I did.
Right.
And he was there a long time. And I know I interned at 12 back in 1976. And
right.
Bill he covered Nassau County as a stringer for TLB. And so I've known him a long time too. But you and him worked really closely together. And he was a big influence on you, I'm sure, as well.
Oh, yeah. Well, we were of common mind. We thought alike on many issues, and he was a big political history buff, which I enjoyed, and we just had a good relationship. The way I always looked at it, Mike, is when you went out with a photographer, you had to be on the same page. And I always tell the story, I tell my kids sometimes, I think I knew my photographers better than I knew my own brothers, you know, because I've been away from home for so long, but you spend every day with them. Right. and you just developed a relationship. So when you got out of the truck, I didn't have to tell Bill or Woody or whomever what to do. I mean, they
Mike
did.
Bunker, he was there
Bunker,
all the
yeah.
time.
I said, I mean, they got out and started doing what they did. I did what I did, and we pulled it all together at the end of the day. So it really wasn't work. I mean, it was work, don't get me wrong, but I mean...
Like you were hanging out with your friends all
Exactly. And we each know what we had to do, and it just made the job so much more enjoyable.
But if you didn't click with a photographer, then it made it a lot harder, didn't it?
Well, it made it a lot harder because, I mean, the last thing you want to do, the job's hard enough the way it is, let alone have some resistance or a communication problem. And I would say, Mike, that didn't happen very often because I usually got along with everyone, and most people made it work, but there were occasions where it became difficult. So when it came the morning assignment meeting, I mean, there's some people you wanted to pick, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, you lobbied, yeah.
Right. And,
Yeah.
and I never saw anything wrong with that because, I mean, if you got a combination that works, a chemistry that works, why change it? That gives you a plan to win, right?
Right, you got to have a plan to win. What were some of the more interesting stories that you covered at TLV that you remember? What are some of the
Well,
most
I tell you
memorable?
what, I mean, God, you span over 30 years, Mike, and there's so many.
Hard to pick one or two or three, isn't it?
Well,
When you look
yeah.
back.
When you look at big events, when was it 5 or 6 Florida graduates or Florida students were killed in Gainesville. That was a huge media event. I'm trying to remember what time frame that was. Was that late 80s, early 90s? I can't remember exact time frame. But that was a huge event because so many people from Jacksonville had families or had kids at Gainesville, and I mean, I think we were down there for days on end. And then wasn't much after that was the Ted Bundy execution. Remember when Bundy was big in the news?
Yeah.
And he had connections with the death of a girl in Lake City, I believe. And I attended his execution. I didn't witness it, but I was part of the media group that was down in Stark at that time. And I mean, those are kind of things that stand out. And God, there's so many other ones. I mean, you remember the start of Desert Storm.
Yeah.
I remember being sent to Fort Stewart, which is an Army base right outside Savannah. And I remember being with Phil Canner. I don't know if you remember Phil.
Remember the name.
Yeah, Phil was a photographer. I called him Action Phil. And I remember we were up there that night and listening to the radio, and I think that's when President Bush said the war started, and just changed the flavor. We were up there when troops departed from Hunter Air Force Base, Hunter Army Base, I believe, and then we'd also be up there when troops returned. I mean, those are things. One thing you do remember, right? Because when you got sent out of town on those type of events, you were gone for days, you know.
Yeah.
And then, who can forget the was it the wildfires of '98?
Oh yeah, man. Yeah.
I remember
Palm
being
Coast, Normandy.
Oh no.
Palm Coast, and
I remember. I was with Bill Z, and we were down. We were almost to Daytona, DeLand, down in there, and we just went south and circled back. And I remember we were coming back through St. Augustine, and it was at night. And see, that was a time before satellite trucks and all that. You had to bring it back. I mean, for the most part. I mean, you didn't have remote
and that was a tough part of the business because you had to rush back and put it together. And
yeah, and then you had to write it in your head or write it down. I mean, you had to be very organized for the most part. But anyway, we were driving back that night, and we were in St. Augustine looking north. And I tell you what, Mike, we were driving, and you look to the north, and all you could see is orange glow. And man, you thought the world was on fire. You thought maybe this is hell on earth. Because I mean, the whole sky was orange. And
so you see those California fires we've had recently, you kind of,
oh yeah,
remind you of that. You
yeah,
know the drill.
it was, I mean, you go get sent out on a story, and God, you were hoping you didn't get encircled by flames, you know, because the force people were doing their jobs, and there's just fire everywhere. It just, that was you know, until you mentioned it, I forgot about that one. But I mean, it was a huge story that year.
And being in TV news and broadcasting could be dangerous at times. Hurricanes,
Right.
fires, dangerous.
Oh, I know. I mean, early on, I remember in the 90s, maybe late 80s, Bob Summers was the photographer. And we got sent out to Biloxi, somewhere in Alabama. And I remember we were driving that night, and power lines popping, and you didn't know where you were going. You didn't have GPS. You didn't have a cell phone. I mean, it was just you were on your own.
I was in some of those too. I know what you mean, man.
I mean, now you have the communication. I mean, everyone knew where you were, but back then they didn't know where you were until you called in and found a landline to call in.
And neither did you.
Well, yeah.
Right.
You know, there's some close calls, but I mean, by the grace of God, we're still here. But I mean, there were some situations because you were out in the front line, and I think that was part of the fun of the job. But sometimes it puts you in a precarious position, and for the most part, people have common sense and know what to do is right.
What would you say is the most interesting or fun part of being a TV news reporter for so long?
The fun part, I tell you what, Mike, I think it was the people you met, because you meet people from all walks of life. You meet people in situations that are both good and bad. I mean, during the 90s, especially, Jacksonville was a violent city. And I remember the times knocking on someone's door to see if a family would have a comment. And you know, I always approached it, Mike, I always approached it, how would I approach my mom? And sometimes you really didn't want to walk up to that door, but you knew you had to. And a lot of times if the mom would speak, or the father, I'd tell the camera guy, shut the camera off. You know what I'm saying? We'll just talk, and if they feel fine with it, fine. If they don't, we totally understand. But I mean, those are moments where you really got to learn a lot about people and how people deal with pain. And I remember one time covering a story where a guy lost his only son in Iraq, and he was a Marine. And I got very close to the man. He always tell me about his son and everything. And if you've never seen one, a Marine Corps funeral is so precise. It's just a ceremony in itself. And those are things I think as you get older, you appreciate what you've learned from little segments in time. It was like a day out of my life, but I mean, you took something away from it. Right. And I think that's what journalism is. It really helps you become a well-rounded person, and you appreciate what you have, and you appreciate what others have gone through.
You have a go-to story, one of the most memorable things, or a funny thing that happened to you that if you had to tell a story about your broadcasting career, that would be the one you would tell?
Well, Bob, I have probably a couple of them. I'm thinking back to the Florida-Georgia game, probably mid-90s, the world's largest cocktail party, and let me tell you, it was big. And anyway, it was on a Saturday night. I got sent down to the landing, Jacksonville Landing, and that place was a mega mob. And I put a story together, and I was downtown. I think it was that circle right by the Andrew Jackson statue. And the anchor at the time, I think it may have been Lee Webb, tossed to me. And Mike, the crowd was just big, and they'd been partying all day. And they got closer and closer, and they got too close for comfort. I mean, I did not feel, and that was a time before we had security on live shots or anything like that. We were just two of us out there. And they got so close when I was doing my live report, it got to the point where I was tired. I got frustrated. And I was hoping I could hold out until I tossed to my story. But before I got to that point, I just took my arm and I said, "Get out of here!"
Come on, get out
Right
of
on the
here!
air. They didn't have a chance to punch it out. But I mean, I was somewhat claustrophobic. I mean, because you never know. And later we found out when, especially like in the 2010, 2015, some of the riots and things, that reporters were really in danger because of the crowds would get so close and they'd start rocking live trucks, and it was a different situation. But that was kind of a humorous thing where I just kind of lost my composure.
Get out of here.
I said, "Get out of here." But then I remember doing a live shot one time when my cell phone went out and went off, my personal cell phone. It was the winter time. I had a heavy jacket. Do you think I could find that cell phone?
No.
I was talking, that thing was ringing. I was moving my hands trying to find it. Anyway, I just let it go to voicemail.
Talked about some of the famous people or interesting people, most interesting or famous people that you met that you remember.
Oh,
Over the years.
geez. A lot of more political type people. Trying to remember Rudy Giuliani, George Bush, that I've met personally. I think, what's her name was here? She did the movie.
Demi Moore?
Demi Moore.
Yeah.
What was that, G.I. Jane?
Yeah.
Is that what it was?
Yeah, that's right. That was it.
And I mean, there were people like that. Rudy Giuliani, when he was campaigning. Then when I was in Louisiana, I met Gary Hart.
Yeah.
And Jimmy Carter and that group. That goes Geraldine Ferraro, first female vice presidential candidate.
Right.
I mean, people like that. But I tell you what, Mike, I much more appreciated meeting the common person out there. The person who was doing good for people, like during the holidays or any time. I mean, it's nice to meet some of these people because some of the famous people, so to speak.
Yeah.
But I mean, it's to me, some of my best memories are just people I met during the day.
Yeah.
Just doing my stories.
Right. You stayed in Jacksonville broadcasting for 31 years.
Right.
A lot of reporters don't do that. They move from here to here
Oh,
to
I
here.
know. I know.
Eventually try to get to New York or Chicago or Denver or somewhere, but you stayed here. Why'd you make a career of it here in Jacksonville?
Well, got married, had 2 kids, and my wife's family was all from here. And I tell you what, to me, there comes a point in life you got to decide what's important. You know what I'm saying? You want to be, and there's nothing wrong about bouncing around and jumping from one market to another. I mean, that's perfectly fine. But I made it a personal decision that my priority was going to be my children, that they be around family, and that was important to me. So it was a value decision. Do I regret it? No. I tell you what, Mike, we live in a great place, great people.
I was going to ask you, how did you see Jacksonville change over the years from when you came here in '85 all the way through to 2016, I guess was your final year at 12?
Right. Oh, I tell you what, back then, Mike, in the mid-'80s, I mean, I remember taking Atlantic Boulevard to go to the beach. As I recall, it was like a dirt road. I mean, there was nothing between Regency and the beach. There was nothing.
Yeah.
I mean, we had, what was the airport there? Craig Field. But I mean, it was just, that was open area. And there was nothing up north where Dames Point Bridge, and Dames Point Bridge opened up that whole part of town when that came into existence. But Jacksonville just changed so much. And it's
And the Jaguars, we had the Jaguars. And you're a
Jaguars.
big sports fan, wanted to be a sportscaster.
Right.
You had to love that.
Oh, yeah. I mean, the Jaguars put the city on the map. I mean, it gave the city a sense of identity. And I think that had been lacking. I think you maybe agree.
Yeah.
But I mean, sports teams, sports franchises tend to do that. And especially the first couple of years when they were winning. We can't say that now.
Yeah.
But back then, I mean, downtown Alltel Stadium, was it Alltel Stadium back then?
Yeah.
I think so, yeah. I mean, that place was rocking.
Another oral history interview I did, somebody told me to get on the plane, where you from, Jacksonville, wouldn't have a clue.
Right.
But after that, they knew.
Exactly. Yeah, it's interesting because people make that connection to a city through a sports team.
How about the changes in the news business, TV news here locally? The changes were really incredible over the years. How would you describe the changes in TV news locally? You went through a bunch of them.
Mike, don't get me started. Mike, it changed so much. I remember back when I came here in '85, there was maybe a half hour in the morning. I think there was a noon show. I think there was a 6 and 11. So maybe 2 hours a day news. And to do a live remote back then was a production. You know, when they had to take a truck out, you had to have multiple engineers. I mean, it was really a big thing when you went live somewhere because it was so much required, because obviously the technology wasn't there like it is today.
Then there came satellite trucks. You could go live out from anywhere.
Right. And then I remember back then, Mike, it was you did your scripts on a typewriter, and you'd have, what they call that? When you did the carbon copies, the multiple copies, and the teleprompter, not like now, is electronic. You had to paste or tape these scripts together, and it was, I mean, it was quite an ordeal. And there was no making last-minute changes, because to make a last-minute change, you had to type something else out or replace it. Right. So I mean, technology changed so many things, but technology changed the demands on reporters, and I mean, you had to do so much more, or you could do much more, because it was technically it was easier to do, but at the same time, the brain only works so fast.
Right. Yeah.
And so, I mean, that's been a change. So, I mean, then you go into how social media has changed everything, and how that complements news or doesn't complement news. It's just it's a whole different animal today.
Right. Almost out of time, but comments for TV news nationally has changed so much. I mean,
well, it's become so divided politically. People watch what they believe politically, you know, and that's just the way people are. I mean, you're not going to watch something that you don't agree with. I mean, that's just the way people are, and I think there's going to be a time there's going to have to be a reset. You know what I'm saying?
And everybody giving their opinions. I never gave my opinion about much of anything for 39 years.
Right. And you were called on the carpet if you did.
Yeah.
But now it seems to be a whole different animal when it comes to that, because to sort out what's fact and what's opinion is a challenge you have to experience every day.
What advice would you give to students, people that wanted to get into broadcasting, young people? What would you say to them?
Think hard. No, I would say, I mean, make sure it's what you want to do, that you have a passion for it. Because it is a very interesting career choice. I mean, you get to see so many things and do so many things, but you have to have a passion for it. Yeah. And I always tell them, I have 2 daughters, and I tell them, follow your heart, follow your passion, because you want to do something you enjoy. Right. But if you enjoy it, you have an interest in news, sports, weather, go for it.
Mm-hmm. You have no regrets going from the farm to broadcasting?
No, I tell you what, Mike, I think the way I kind of look at it, no, I have no regrets. But I tell you what, I think as you get older, you kind of go back to where you started. And now I do a lot of work with my hands. I have properties I work on. So life has a way of making a full circle, you know what I'm saying? But no, I have no regrets. I mean, I always looked at broadcasting as having the front seat on life. You know, you got to see everything from the front.
There's another one of your sayings, the front seat on life.
Right, yeah. Right. And there's value to that, but also, as being a journalist, came responsibility. But it's not a bad way to go through life. I enjoyed it. No regrets, but change is not bad either.
Retirement going well at the beach?
It's all, yeah. Well, I probably keep busier now than I did when I was working. But no, it's been good, Michael.
Yeah. Well, I worked with you at competing station, I think, in Jacksonville for 19 years. I got to work with you for about 11 years alongside you at 12. It was a great experience. It was fun.
Actually, you sat right across from me.
That's right, we did. And listen to those one-liners every day.
Well, Mike, what was the one? When you get older, you say, "Where do you go to retire?"
Right. Well, I appreciate you. Enjoyed working with you, and appreciate you coming
Mike.
on for this oral history interview today.
It's my pleasure. Always good seeing you, Bubba.
All right.